Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world, but those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Grace to you and peace in Jesus' name. Amen. It was about 1.5 years ago that the holiday fire broke out. It broke out about 1.5 miles from where I live. It was evening. The electricity was out all through the neighborhood. We could see towers of flames through the trees. We could smell the smoke. The darker it became, the more frightening it became. I mean, that's the way it is with fires. I stood on the sidewalk out in front of the house with neighbors until about 1:15 that morning. Our news sources, since electricity was out, our news sources were battery-powered laptops. And then sometimes passers-by who'd be out scouting through the neighborhood to see what they could see. "Oh, that is close," one person said when there was a flare-up. Another, looking at the flames, said, "That is definitely a house on fire." Considering the number of fires over the past years, think about the flooding that followed the Thomas fire, it is clear that we have seen our share of disasters lately. We've been more than grateful to the firefighters and other first responders, and we've come together as a community in those tough times. Neighbors there for neighbors, helping each other. The coronavirus is different. I mean, we're still more than grateful to the medical community and so many others who are there for us in spite of the risks to their own health. What is different with this corona pandemic is that we cannot really run from it. The virus has invaded just about every country in the world. And there is another big difference. People are now told not to come together, but rather to keep a safe distance from each other. We are under stay-at-home orders, and people are talking about cabin fever. They're talking about how difficult it is to stay at home, deal with it. How difficult it is to be socially isolated from others. Oh, to be free to get up and go and do something constructive, do something just to help someone. Instead, the best thing that we can do is stay at home. The best thing we can do for others and ourselves is keep our distance. Stay at home and wait for the inevitable rise in the numbers of those who are ill. Stay at home, wait for the peak. Stay at home and wait for a virus that is out of control, which also means, by the way, that we are out of control, or so it seems. In our gospel reading today, which comes from John chapter 11, we can almost hear the anguish in Martha's voice. Days before, Martha and her sister Mary, who were dear friends of Jesus, had sent a message to him saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." Now, even though Jesus loved Lazarus and loved Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, Jesus stayed 2 days longer where he was. By the time that Jesus and his disciples finally arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. There was no question that Lazarus was dead. Now, the first words that came out of Martha's voice when she saw Jesus approaching, her first words were, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Such heartbreaking words. Can you hear Martha feeling just completely out of control here? Where were you, Jesus? How could you let something like this happen? Yet, at the same time, in the same breath, Martha expressed faith. It was a faith that was busy grasping for something to hold on to. But even now, she said, even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Have you ever begged God for something on behalf of a loved one? If you have, then you know how Martha was feeling. Jesus heard Martha, and Jesus saw her faith there, even in the midst of raw grief. Jesus saw this. Jesus heard Martha and took her to an even deeper place. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. I am." You remember the name that God shared with Moses. God said, "I am who I am. I am who I am." In other words, Jesus is the very presence of God with power over life and death. Jesus continued, "Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die." Martha's reply to Jesus is one of the strongest confessions of faith in the whole New Testament. Martha said, "Yes, I believe, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." And this confession against the backdrop of her own brother Lazarus' death, after days of wondering where Jesus was, what took him so long, why Jesus wasn't there to help. Here is the thing, friends, in faith. Sometimes faith comes at surprising times. Sure, you and I have seen people turn away from God at the time of the death of a loved one. But, well, I have also seen people be drawn to God, be drawn into deeper faith in God at the time of the death of a loved one. Sometimes faith deepens when the going gets rough. It was about 20 years ago now that I served with a pastor who had a heart attack come on suddenly a few years before. He was only in his 50s at the time. And talk about someone who had a faithful servant's heart then and still to this day. He believes that God kept him alive, gave him a second chance for a reason. And he is absolutely a delight to everyone who comes near. I have to believe that that is the way that Lazarus must have seen it, that God had given him a second chance after Jesus called him out of the tomb of death and into life and told those around the tomb, unbind him and let him go. God gave Lazarus a second chance. And people of God, through Jesus' tomb, God gives us a second chance. God has brought us out of death and into life. And now we are Lazarus. And now it is for us who are free from the bondage of death to trust that God is at work in us and in this world still today, in the midst of this corona pandemic. And it is for us to join in God's work of healing and reconciling. To be sure, we are under stay-at-home orders, but we're not as helpless as we might think. We can still witness to the life that is stronger than death. We can do it by staying calm, for example, when the chorus around us is so anxious. Yet keep a safe distance, yes, but be kind and considerate to the people that you do meet along the way, that you encounter. Workers in grocery stores, for instance. Use the telephone. One of the best inventions ever. Use whatever form to communicate with people that you normally see and interact with and greet, whether it be at work or at school or in the neighborhood, at church. Tell people that you miss seeing them and that you wonder how they are. And as you are able, be generous. No, not everyone is in a position to do that right now. This is a trying time, to be sure. But give generously if you can to people and organizations. Give the church as much as ever in these times when resources are short. Be courageous. Be compassionate and be open to growing in faith. And you will surprise others with your faith and your love. And now may the peace of God that surpasses all understanding keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Amen.